Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly book reading session. I'm Aisha, and I will be hosting today. And we have here with us Chris Bonnello. And today we will be moving forward to our next chapter. And before we move forward, how are you doing, Chris?
Yeah, not bad. It's a bit of a shame that our usual streaming service has given us technological difficulties, but we seem to have recovered fairly well.
Yeah, I think so. We did good. And so before we move on to the recap of the session, of the book we of the chapters we did last time, is there anything new or anything interesting going on that you would like to share with us?
It's just been a fairly quiet summer here really. It's,
All right.
can't really be much interesting to say.
All right. So, I think we can move on to the recap before we start a new chapter then.
Okay, so can't remember whether we did two chapters last time or three chapters, but um, Ewan, Kate, Alex, and McCormick, who has freshly recovered from his operation, have just left Spitfire's Rise to launch their attack on New London. And the last we heard from them, they're actually at Oakenfold and they're staying the night there. And from there, they're basically going to fit into uh, the people who are bringing in all the research from Oakenfold to New London. Meanwhile, Lorraine and Shannon are on comms and had a bit of an awkward conversation. Lorraine is rather good at awkward conversations about fairly deep and hurtful topics, but um, she is rather nervous about how the event's going to go for some reason, possibly because she is the only one besides McCormick who knows uh, where the bombs are. Now, this is something that was discussed uh, while the strike team were just about to go to bed. McCormick pulls out this detonator and says, right, last time I was in New London around Christmas time, I planted a bunch of plastic explosives and they're in such a sensitive place that it will basically change the course of the war once they're blown up. So if the mission becomes absolutely hopeless, press this button. And Kate volunteered to hold it. He's not very happy that Kate specifically volunteered, and he's not offering any reasons why. And finally, and this leads to chapter 15, which we're currently on. Uh, the rest of Spitfire's Rise is evacuating. They're pretty sure that the Alex clones have memories of where Spitfire's Rise is, so they basically got to pack up and leave. And Jack is leading the search for a new Spitfire's Rise. So that's where we were. Are we ready to start with chapter 15?
Absolutely.
Okay, here we go. Chapter 15. Jack stood in the hallway of his new house. Spitfire's Rise Mark II, unless he could come up with a better name, and decided that, all things considered, it would be a suitable building. It didn't have the fancy wallpaper or the nice furniture or the cleanliness that came with the year of being looked after. But there was a grandfather clock that looked nice and plenty of unexpired food in the cupboards. It had taken them until midnight to choose an acceptable village, but by 1 in the morning, Jack had already found a house that would suit the Underdogs' needs. He hadn't expected success that quickly, or even by the end of the night. Well, that was weird and unplanned, he thought as he nodded to himself in satisfaction. Just like me, I guess. That's me, I'm kind of proud of that line. As predicted, Jack had done most of the work himself. Thomas had plenty of ideas, but none that were practical. Gracie had shied away from contributing at all, and whereas Simon was not to be underestimated, he had seemed content to follow the group that night, or more specifically, to follow Jack. Jack marched back down the stairs and reopened the front door to the trio awaiting him in the front garden. Their rucksacks and boxes of belongings rested on the driveway. Shannon, Lorraine, and Mark would have more at comms, but even then it was a pitiful amount to have brought from home. I just called Spitfire's Rise home, even now. Guys, he said, I think I just found us a new house. Are the beds comfy? Asked Gracie. Wasn't testing them, oddly enough. Come on, let's start unpacking. Gracie, Thomas, and Simon in turn passed him and walked into the building they were supposed to accept as their new hideout. But most of Jack's brain was telling him to think of this as just another stop-off on the way to a mission, like Lemsford had been. And after a night here, they'll be heading home tomorrow. In fact, he thought, how the hell are we going to keep this place a secret like we did with Spitfire's Rise? I've already seen the name of this village. Even if I take down all the signs myself before anyone else sees them, the moment I get captured, Jack shuddered. He pretended to himself that it was from the cold night breeze, rather than the memory of what Raj had done to himself to keep his knowledge a secret. Jack had searched in the most logical way he had known how to, of course, north of the original Spitfire's Rise, to avoid any invading force from New London passing the new house on the way to the old. But not too far north, otherwise hours and hours will be added to every trip to New London. Out in the countryside to avoid the diseases of the cities, and most importantly, just the right balance between being an unlikely place for Grant to search, but not being so unlikely that it will paradoxically become the most obvious place for them to hide. Jack hoped he had got everything right. The underdogs were dead if he made a mistake. If he had made a mistake. And as a 17-year-old who was accustomed to the world telling him things, he had a lot to overcome in order to feel confident. He turned to the front door and entered his new home, trying in vain to wipe the village's name from his memory. With a memory like his, he was not going to manage it. And with a village name like T Green, the most stereotypically English name a village could possibly have, it was buried in his brain forever. Oh yeah, I used Google Maps when deciding where things are, and yes, T Green is an actual village in England. He walked back into the darkened house and switched his torch back on. This house was going to be intimidating and claustrophobic without the lights that their petrol generator could have powered. I don't like it, came Gracie's voice from somewhere on the ground floor. As was so often the case back in the old world, even Jack's absolute best was not good enough. Well, let's see if the beds really are comfy, he answered, in a voice he made to sound confident. He fumbled his way up the stairs towards the closest bedroom. Seconds of this house being his home, and he already needed a time out. He started climbing through the dark, first one step at a time, then 2 steps, and then jumps rather than steps. Just like how people found themselves needing the toilets more urgently the closer they to it, Jack's need for shelter became stronger with every step towards the bedroom. One of his quivering hands brushed against a living person that his torchlight had not detected. Both Jack and the small figure jumped in fright. Sorry, said Thomas in the darkness. Where do you think McCormick would want these? Jack looked down at a collection of envelopes in Thomas's hands. Jack loved Thomas as much as any decent person would, but at that moment he reached for the most dismissive answer possible. Depends what's in them, he said. If it's private, under his mattress. Which one's his? You get to choose. Jack didn't hang around for a reply. He slipped into the bedroom, the door behind him, and plunged himself into the pitch black. He found the bed and collapsed onto it with such force that the dust on the duvet leapt into the air like a swarm of disturbed flies. This isn't home, he thought. It's unfamiliar. It's dark. It's cold. It's missing all the little things that made life in the abandoned countryside tolerable, like electronic games and chessboards and our own little farm. Even the right people aren't here. Most of them are dead, and we don't even have a memorial for them here. And on top of that, this is one of the things in my life that I absolutely cannot afford to get even the slightest bit wrong. I'm scared here. I always will be. Before Jack knew it, he was in tears. He was not expecting actual tears, just the below-the-surface bubbling of emotions clawing their way towards his eyes. But the tears came regardless. It was absolutely the wrong moment for the silhouette of Gracie to walk through the door, but she did anyway. 2 interruptions in less than a minute, almost like the universe did not want him to rest. I'm cold, Jack, she said. Me too. There was a hint in her voice that she wanted something else, but Jack couldn't translate it. After a momentary silence, she spoke again. Could we warm each other up? Oh, bloody hell, Gracie, don't put me in this position. You know, with kissing? I took the hint, Gracie. Even I'm perceptive enough for that one. In one of the most awkward and uncomfortable moments of Jack's adolescence, Gracie sat down on the bed next to him. The touch of her hand felt like a miniature electric shock, one which he felt guilty for feeling. He had spent much of the last year avoiding Gracie's advances, but in Lemsford they had spent an afternoon alone, which had started with them making some kind of connection and had ended with them saving each other's lives. Jack had since been wrestling with the idea of telling her the truth, and the hand against his side persuaded him that the problem was not going away. It was better to get it over with, and that moment was the best opportunity to do so. not least because he had reached his full mental capacity for sadness anyway, so the ordeal wouldn't make him feel any worse. I'm not going to kiss you, Gracie. Why not? I can't. And not after today either. I can teach you how it works if you like. No, Gracie. I'm sorry, I really am, but the answer's no. I. He took a deep breath, then finished his sentence after coughing out the dust that invaded his lungs. I can't be who you want me to be. At first, she gave no response. She probably hadn't expected this answer. Maybe the thought of rejection hadn't even crossed her mind. And in her own planned version of the conversation, Jack was supposed to say yes. They were close friends after all, weren't they? What do you mean? She asked, not quite offended, but certainly hurt. I'll never have a girlfriend, Gracie, or a boyfriend, or anyone. It's my fault, not yours. There's something up with my brain, and it's not just autism. It means I can't find people attractive, even pretty people, or people I really care about. And I do care about you, honestly, I do. But you can't have me as just a friend, then you can't have me at all. I'm sorry, I don't get to have a say in this. It's my brain. My soul truly cares about you, but my brain doesn't. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, in case I haven't mentioned this before, Jack's asexual, but he has no idea what asexuality is. And it is in no way based on me when I was 17. Definitely not. Gracie gave no words in return. Her breathing got louder and more erratic as the mattress rose underneath Jack, revealing that she had stood up. One creak of the door later, the room fell silent. Well, bloody played, Jack. The one person who will ever want to go out with a weird kid like you, and you broke her heart as punishment for asking. Then again, thought the other side of his brain, not telling her would have hurt her more in the long run. Whichever way I chose it was going to be wrong, but at least I chose the lesser evil. It was the type of thought train that could have occupied his brain for the entire night if he had not been interrupted. But a moment later, Simon completed the set of interrupters by bursting into the room. Finally, after holding himself together so well throughout the evening, Jack ran out of patience. Oh, bloody burning balls of crap, Jack snarled, far too loudly. Is there anyone else behind you in the bloody queue, Simon? A hedgehog with a poorly foot that only I can look after? Or a fox wanting career advice or something? Do I have to declare base before people respect that my day is over and I'm in bed now? The silence was predictable and horrible. But it was quite enough for a different voice to enter Jack's head. One he had not heard in its physical form since he was 12. Jack, said a voice that reminded him of his mother, if that had truly been what she had sounded like. It's because they rely on you. Don't you get it? You're valued here, and sometimes being valued is hard. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. It made little difference to his vision, but it helped him to focus the chaos in his head. There's no easy way of living, is there? Thought Jack's own voice. No, came the answer. If you're lonely, it's hard. If people depend on you, it's hard. That's the truth of it, and I wish it were easier. I'm sorry, Simon, Jack said, before the voice in his mind could say anything else. Somewhere in the silence, Jack was sure he heard a whisper. Okay, it said. At first, Jack thought he had invented the noise himself. Simon had never spoken to him with words before. I'll be all right, Simon. I'm sorry I got frustrated. It's been a long night. What did you want me for? There was a pause, and Simon's whisper came again. Okay. Yes, I'm sure I'm fine. What can I do for you? Okay. The penny dropped, if that was the right phrase. Jack looked in the direction of the whisper. Is that what you came here for, Simon? To ask me if I was okay? Yeah. Jack was overcome with a whole different range of emotions. It was a wonderful compliment, but it came with searing guilt. Simon had come to check upon his friend and been ranted at in return by a friend who almost never ranted at anyone. Beyond the emotional struggle, it was an opportunity Jack did not get very often. Someone offering to listen to how he felt rather than ask for his advice. It was an opportunity worth taking. Well, I guess my secrets are safe with you, Jack said, swinging his legs off the bed and switching on his torch. A moment later, he realised how the sentence had sounded. Wait, he blurted. I didn't mean because of you not talking much. It's because I know I can trust you. Sorry if it... Well, anyway. Simon sat on the bed at his side and patted him on the shoulder. Jack pretended not to hate it. Simon was being his own kind of supportive, and discouraging a selective mute from nonverbal communication would be a dreadful idea. Simon, Jack said, I think I've just worked out why I'm still alive. He shone the torchlight vaguely towards Simon, enough to see the confusion in his face. I don't know if I told you this, but I tried to kill myself a couple of times. Back in the old world. I've not tried since Takeover Day, never even come close. And tonight, just now, I think I worked out why. It's because people depend on me. Jack thought he could feel another tear, but he had stopped being bothered about them. I mean, I started crying when I collapsed on this bed. And when you think about it, that was the moment nobody needed me to be okay. A whole night looking for a house in the dead of night and I was fine. 10 seconds of everyone being okay and I fell apart. You know what that means, Simon? Simon huffed. Jack could not decipher what kind of huff it was. It means I value the rest of you more than I value myself. So I keep myself alive and well for you all. And, all right, yeah, it's a crap reason to keep yourself going. But if it works, right? Simon huffed again, and even Jack could tell it was a huff of despondence. I'll be okay, Simon. You don't need to worry about me. Jack wasn't sure how true that was, but it seemed like the right thing to say. Simon patted him on the shoulder again, and Jack forced himself not to flinch in case it hurt Simon's feelings. They were much more important than his, after all. Thanks for the chat, Simon, Jack said. At least someone asked if I was all right. Simon smiled in the torchlight and rose to his feet. The conversation ended there and then as Simon walked out of the door and left Jack to his own devices. Jack lay himself flat on his bed, without getting undressed or even covering himself with a duvet. It took him several hours of inactivity, but he eventually fell asleep from exhaustion. He awoke in daylight, with his watch telling him he had slept until mid-morning, but a whole night's sleep had not rid the conversation with Simon from his mind. As he looked out of his bedroom window at the unfamiliar street, his thoughts turned to Ewan and the others. In a sense, they were keeping themselves alive for other people too, so maybe Jack was nothing special after all. He just hoped that by the time it struck midnight that evening and it became May 20th, his friends in New London would still have lives to keep. Okay, end of scene, not quite the end of the chapter.
Okay, so that was quite intense, like considering how open Jack really was throughout. I mean, first the incident with Crazy, and then like kind of intense considering how so many of us, like, we do wait for people like Simon to come up to us and ask what can we do for you? What can I do for you? So yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and oddly enough, that's half chapter there was that wasn't even in the book until a couple of months before the book got published, when I came to realise that even though Jack's quite a main secondary character or secondary main character, whichever way you want to put it, in the first one, and he's a fairly main character throughout the whole series, he doesn't really do much in Tooth and Nail. He stays outside of Oakenfold while everyone else goes in. He does have that amazing fight with the three Alex clones, and then he isn't part of the showdown. So I decided to write Jack's experience of finding this new house,
Yeah,
feeling quite conflicted about it, and also admitting to people what his perspective on life is. So Jack doesn't do that much in this second book, but I wanted to keep him at the front of people's minds as the main character.
I think it did that.
Thank you. Okay, so I say it's the second half, but it's more like the third of this chapter because that was a fairly long scene there. That was like 2/3 of the chapter. But here's the other third. Ewan was impressed with himself, which wasn't a feeling he experienced often. He hadn't thought he could spend a whole day walking around Oakenfold surrounded by clones without a single emotion appearing on his face. Then again, most of his life had been spent masking his feelings for the convenience of others. 16 years of practice had led him to putting on a stellar performance that day. Ignoring the sensory assault of his navy blue clone uniform, he took the last box of papers from the makeshift shelf and handed it to Alex, who stood beside him, equally emotionless. Alex had been given a few funny looks from clones who were not yet familiar with the new clone model, but nobody had made a fuss or even bothered to question his scar. Even Ewan's appearance had not been questioned. Perhaps they had assumed him to be one of the reinforcement models from New Reading. It was late afternoon, the day's brightness showing warning signs of fading through the windows, and their job was nearly done. This is the last of them, right? Alex whispered, as faintly as he could, and after double-checking that they were alone. Shh, Ewan replied anyway. But it is, right? Ewan rolled his eyes and nodded. Thanks to Raj's efforts in the library, there had been less paperwork to carry to the transports. He walked towards the sports hall's exit, Alex close behind with the box in both hands. We spent the whole day helping the enemy, you know. Ewan grew impatient enough to whisper back. The sooner we're finished packing, the sooner they start the journey to New London. Besides, we'll be burning all this stuff once it reaches the paper archive anyway. Why am I carrying the last box? Because you were daft enough to take it from me. Ewan, if I had a free hand, guess what I'd be doing with my middle finger? Picking your nose. Now shut up. Ewan and Alex walked out of the school entrance towards the convoy of transport vehicles in the car park. For what must have been the 20th time that day, they walked past Raj. His headless body had been horrifying enough the previous night, without the details being revealed in broad daylight. Of all the reasons for Ewan to struggle with keeping a straight face, the repeated sight of his friend's exploded body was by far the most challenging. Ewan reached their van and opened the back doors. Alex placed the final box of papers on top of the pile and slammed the door shut before any onlookers could see what else lay inside. The two young men in clothed uniforms headed for the driver and passenger seats, Alex driving, of course, and waited for the convoy to start moving in front of them. The journey to New London Citadel, when it finally began, was a dull and joyless one. As the gargantuan northern walls came into view, Ewan's biggest emotional response was relief from his boredom. Somewhere up ahead, the first van in the convoy slowed as it approached the wire fence. There was a faint buzz in Ewan's ears as they passed. He had never been close enough to the fence to know it was electric, but had often suspected it to be. Oh, this place looks familiar, Alex muttered as they approached the concrete guard post ahead. Ewan looked to his side and found a semi-cylindrical tunnel that looked familiar to him too. You were here when we broke out of New London last time. When I broke you out, yeah. Which means we're just about to hear the dullest voice known to man. Soldiers in vehicles 131 to 137, came a monotonous voice through the driver's radio. This is Arnold Salter, Deployment Director for Vehicle Port 3. Once cleared by security, park in your vehicles assigned bay and assist guards with inventory checks. All vehicles please acknowledge. Ewan pressed the communication button on his clone radio and produced a long beep. Wow, said Alex. 3 weeks since I last heard him speak, and only for a few sentences. And I was busy being an action hero at the time. But I still remember every boring inflection of Salter's stupid voice. Ewan did not comment. After 2 minutes of waiting for the traffic to move, Alex began to trundle the van along the mile-long road to the vehicle port. The entrance became visible inside the enormous shade of New London, a tiny mouse hole compared to the concrete walls that surrounded it. Their van drove into the port and they were ensnared by the flurry of clone soldiers running to and fro, transporting the inbound equipment on giant trolleys. Alex found his allocated spot and pulled up his handbrake. Ewan thought it better to act while the inspection guards were busy with the neighbouring vehicle. He swung his side door open and stepped onto the tarmac, fixing his unbothered expression back in place, and once again masked all fear of the plan going wrong. He met Alex at the van's rear, where they threw open the back doors. Ewan and Alex leapt in pretend shock, the kind of shock a clone would feel if the two stowaways among their equipment really had been unexpected. One of the stowaways was an old man, the other was a young woman. Ewan reached for the pistol in his holster. His shower of bullets caught the attention of every clone in the vehicle port, and the inspection guards pelted in their direction. By the time they arrived, the gunfire had ceased, leaving two blood-splattered bodies among the boxes of paper. Ewan looked to his right as the flustered lead inspector switched to war mode and squeezed his radio's panic button as if trying to crack a walnut with his fingers. Arnold Salter's reply was so quick that his opening words were lost under the beep. Guards, report situation. The main inspector, still deep in war mode with his face reddening and his hand muscles tensed, typed something with the communication button on his radio. He was using the clone's best method of communication, a simplified form of Morse code, but Ewan could not identify what was being said. I'll report this to Grant immediately, came Salter's voice, which had lost its bored monotony. Vehicle staff confirmed that the rebels actually are deceased, then advanced to Office 35 near Stairwell 15X for formal identification. I will meet you there. Alex leapt into the van to check Kate and McCormick's pulses and gave a thumbs down to the guards. Ewan climbed inside and they took one body each. With a nod to the inspection guards, their interaction was over. Other vehicles, Salter's voice continued through the radio, be vigilant. There has never been an attack by only 2 rogue humans. There may be more hidden in the convoy, and they might have heard you shooting their teammates. Ewan smiled as discreetly as he could at Salter's words, as he slung Kate's body over his shoulder. Alex was unable to complain about being left with a heavier body, and followed with McCormick on his back. They climbed out of the van, leaving the dozen heavy boxes of paper for someone else to sort out. Ewan had expected an intense, dangerous amount of interest from other clone soldiers in the vehicle port. He was surprised when they turned back to their vehicles and continued their job as if nothing had happened. Well, I guess underdogs are less interesting when they're dead. Ewan and Alex made their way through the vehicle port exit, and the heavy door slammed behind them, leaving them and the bodies on their shoulders, isolated in the corridors of Floor Z. Ugh, thank bloody hell for that, said Alex with a laugh as he lowered McCormick from his shoulders. Ewan lowered Kate to the floor with a relieved smile across his face. And you all doubted me, said McCormick, resting a hand against the wall and straightening his back. I told you, didn't I? If we can't sneak in unnoticed, we might as well be noticed and not seen as a threat. Good job the clone blood lasted all the way through the journey, added Kate, double and triple checking the rucksack to ensure nothing had fallen out while she had been carried. We'd have been less convincing covered in powdery blood. Ewan shrugged, not entirely surprised. The blood had been fresh when they had killed the driver and passenger at Oakenfold, with nice silent stab wounds, and dabbed the blood across Kate and McCormick's stolen uniforms. The blood had jellied a little, but the powdering stage usually didn't happen until after a day. Guys, he said, are we really going to stand here chatting in clone uniform? We just pulled off something brilliant. Let's not ruin it now. Fair enough, said Alex. What's the plan? Well, answered McCormick, stretching his legs and readying himself for a jog. Arnold Salter is on his way to Office 35 on Floor X, preparing to meet us and identify our bodies. Let's make his acquaintance. End of chapter 15.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay, we need to go to chapter 16 now, I think. So,
Yep.
I need to know what happens.
Yep. So the showdown has now officially begun on chapter 16 out of 28. Okay. Chapter 16. Office 35, Floor X, Ewan thought, hardly deserving of the title of Office. Ewan had only needed to look around him to recognise what the room was for. Even if it hadn't had a plaque stuck on its entrance that read Identification Chamber, its interior felt like some kind of operating theatre or a morgue, with sinks and hygiene equipment for like gloves and waste bags, walls lined with desks covered with test tubes, syringes, and obscure DNA analysis machines or whatever, and a central table for dead bodies. How many of my friends have lain dead on that table? Ewan asked himself, picturing Nicholas Grant personally standing at the entrance, crossing names off that list of rebels. He imagined that just about all of the underdogs who had died inside New London would have been brought to this room. He gave a shudder at the thought of Beth Foster, Thomas's mother, lying dead on the table he was staring at. Or David and Val Riley, after Roth had forced one to kill the other. Or Miles, Tim, Ben, or any of the others. Daniel and Mopolos had probably missed the chance to see this room, since they already knew his identity before torturing him to death for information. Charlie, however... Ewan felt anger, genuine three-dimensional anger, as he stood in the same room where the dead bodies of his allies, friends, and classmates must have been dropped onto that table and autopsied. You all right, Ewan? Asked McCormick. Perhaps it was a question that wasn't a question. Adults loved asking those. McCormick must have seen the expression on Ewan's transparent face and detected his mood. Yeah, fine, Ewan answered, giving the response that adults seem to love too. You know, if you and Kate are dead, you'd better go on the table before Salter arrives. Ah, yes, good point, said McCormick, heading to the edge of the makeshift operating table. He rested himself against it, leaned backwards with the slow, creaking precision of a construction crane, and swung his legs into position at a speed that made Ewan wonder how long the man would last if chased by roving clones. Kate followed suit, the concern in her face so visible that even Ewan could detect it. Alex, however, seemed as unaffected by everything as usual. I know we're trying to make Salter talk, he said, but let's not encourage him too enthusiastically, okay? Our priority is to destroy the AME shield, McCormick answered from his morgue table, and it's likely to involve people getting hurt. I'm planning to be far more merciful to this man than most people would think he deserves. Remember who we're dealing with, Alex. Arnold Salter would have had his minions kill all four of us if he'd had his chance. And when you command people to murder, you're doing the equivalent of pulling the trigger yourself. No one in that position gets to claim the moral high ground. Oh, it wasn't that, Alex answered with a grin. Trust me, you don't want to hear too much of his voice. Speaking of not hearing voices, said Ewan, everyone be quiet. We're clones and you're dead. Alex obeyed, and the identification chamber fell quiet. 5 long minutes passed in dull, lifeless silence, Ewan's fingers fidgeting in anticipation, before a beep sounded at the door. Ewan took a deep breath and lowered his hands to his hips. The door opened, and a short man with a face like a turtle ambled into Office 35. He was flanked on one side by the tall blonde clone model, and on the other by a clone of a Japanese origin. Ewan did not recognise him. He must also have been an import. He and Alex, as agreed 10 minutes earlier, waited until the precise moment the door closed and locked itself before they drew their pistols and shot both clones dead. The clones fell lifeless to the floor. Between the two corpses, Arnold Salter wore an expression of clueless horror. His jaw hung open, but he was as wordless as the two dead clones. The whites of his eyes began to stand out more than the rest of his face. "You must be Arnold Salter," Ewan said. "Good to meet you face to face." Salter looked to his left and let out an audible gasp as Kate and McCormick's bodies rose from the examination table. To Salter, it must have been like watching zombies rising from their graves. You may have gathered, but Salter, seemingly fueled by impulse, or perhaps fear of what Grant would do to him if he put up no resistance, reached for his holster to draw out a little pistol. Before he could do so, Alex fired a bullet, which popped through his right hand and tore through most of its tendons. Salter stumbled around in agony, producing a sound that Ewan almost didn't recognise as human. It certainly wasn't monotonous anymore. "Didn't have to do that, did you?" Alex said to him as Ewan grabbed his arms. Salter's body did the only thing it knew how to do under the circumstances, and a small pool of vomit spilled over his bottom row of teeth. Most of Ewan froze in disgust, except for his feet, which shuffled away from the floor beneath Salter's mouth. He looked at the man in disbelief as he choked on the thin trickle that hadn't quite made it to the top. "Really?" he asked, forcing Salter towards the centre of the room and bundling him onto the table with an underdog at each corner. Not all monsters look fearsome, Ewan thought to himself as he stared at Salter's face. Some monsters hide away in their offices signing death warrants. Some monsters wear suits or sit at computer desks. Some monsters vomit in fright when they're caught. Kate returned from seizing the automatic weapons from the dead guards and dumped them onto the desk and gripped Salter's right wrist. Alex removed the man's firearm from his holster and laid a forceful hand against his forehead, pressing the back of his skull against the table. Ewan inspected the man's face, tracking where his eyes went in case they revealed his intentions. His gaze seemed to land on McCormick. "You're him," Salter gasped with widened eyes. "You're actually him. You're Joseph McCormick." McCormick chuckled and raised his hands in fake astonishment. "Wow, this identification chamber really does work," he said with a laugh. Ewan tried not to smile, but it was difficult to resist the aging man's wit. McCormick walked to the clones and picked up their radios, before leaning directly over Salter's face. Ewan had never seen Dr. Joseph McCormick as an imposing figure. Authoritative, maybe, but not imposing. Perhaps he was seeing what the man had once looked like with his university students when they needed a serious talking to. "We don't have much time," started McCormick. "It's 8:15, and we need to be done by midnight. You must be clever enough to know what we're doing here." "The AME shield," Salter gasped. "You want me to stop it going up, otherwise you'll kill me, if killing is your modus operandi?" "Our what?" asked Kate. "Our way of doing things," answered McCormick. Ewan gave no reaction, glad that Kate had been the one to ask the question. He had spent enough of his life looking like the stupid one in large groups. "I know you've killed hundreds of clones between you," Salter said with a panicked squirm. "But clones are clones, here today and gone tomorrow. Could you really bring yourself to slaughter a human being, one who can look you in the eyes and speak in your own language?" Ewan trembled at the memory of the real humans who had died by his hands. Salter was wrong in assuming he couldn't kill humans, but the words affected him anyway. But still, Ewan could use his history to his advantage. "Remember Stephen Elcott?" he asked. "Fat guy, worked in the officer sector on Floor S, died last month." Salter's eyes widened as they met Ewan's, which alone answered the question. "Yeah, that was me. He was my third human. Strictly speaking, I've been a human killer since Takeover Day." "Who the hell did you kill on Takeover Day?" asked Alex with a curious laugh. "Shut up, that's who," Ewan replied. Ewan turned his eyes away from the inevitable hurt in McCormick's face and hoped he didn't look so guilty that Salter picked it up. But either way, their captive must have had other things on his mind. "You still remember Stephen's name," Salter whispered. "He must still haunt you." Ewan's mouth dropped open and his blinking increased. Salter, despite his helpless situation, had struck him where it hurt, right in the conscience. But Salter said no more, perhaps aware that the strategy of hurting his captors would not help him escape his situation. "I can't stop the AME shield from being raised," Salter continued, "and no matter what—" "Oh, we know," said Alex. "For your sins, and despite the horrific things you'd said yes to during your employment with Grant, you're still a generic, nothing special vehicle police officer. We're not expecting you to help that much. We do need your keycard, though. It's in my left pocket. Take it." Kate's hands rummaged through Salter's left trouser pocket and emerged with his keycard. Salter began to gasp in even more erratic, panicked breaths, and Ewan understood why. Without that card, Salter was no different to a clone soldier, or even one of the rebels. His life in the upper floors in New London was over. Okay, Salter said, tears emerging in his eyes. Make it quick. Oh, we don't like killing humans, answered McCormick, unless it results in saving the lives of more humans. And we don't need to kill you, so we won't. Sir, said Alex, not to contradict you in front of the enemy, but look, he won't give us away, Alex. He's dead the moment he speaks. He has let rebels into New London and given them access to the higher floors. Grant won't let him live. McCormick's right, Ewan thought. If one bit of information spills out from Salter's lips, Grant will probably save him for Oliver Roth. But I can make you a deal, McCormick continued. It involves us staying undetected and you staying alive. Win-win, I'd say. I'm listening, Salter gasped. Ewan was astonished at how quickly this man complied with their every demand. For a man with no good options, Salter seemed to instinctively know where his best chances of survival lay. You leave this room, McCormick began, unarmed and without your keycard, carrying nothing but your radio and the radios from the two clones on the floor. You use the authority you still have in Vehicle Port 3, take a van of your choice and leave New London, sheltering in a nearby village away from Grant's forces but within radio range. It's funny, I can actually recommend a nice little bungalow, said Alex before Ewan shushed him. In return, McCormick continued, you keep all three radios by your side and check in whenever commanded. Which is every 15 minutes tonight, said Ewan. I took the dead plane's radio as a token fold so they wouldn't detect them missing. I had to check in so many times on the way to New London, I almost wish I hadn't bothered. Once the night is over, finished McCormick, you can live out the rest of your days in the English countryside away from Grant's brave new world. How does that sound? Salter nodded. Wait, said Kate. You're just going by trust? How do you know he won't give us away the moment he's out of sight? Because, Ewan said, when Grant finds out what he's done, he's dead. What do you think, Arnold? Is it worth giving your life to reveal our presence? No. Now, please, just let me go out quickly. The soldiers backed off as McCormick passed the dead plane's radios to Salter. Even unrestrained, Salter didn't move a muscle, perhaps magnetized to the table through fear. Here, said Alex, tossing a little green box towards him. Have a medkit for your hand. No hard feelings, mate. Salter tried to catch it, but it slipped through the remains of his wounded hand. Right, said Ewan, let's head off. The Central Research Headquarters and the experiment chamber are both on floor F. Alex and I'll take that. Wait, and no, Alex, you're not doing your lone wolf thing again. We can't afford the risk. Sir, you and Kate can take the data servers and the paper archive, since floors P and R are next to each other. Learn the alphabet, Ewan, said Alex. Ewan didn't waste time checking whether Alex was right. It would do him no good. One thing I've been meaning to ask, said Kate. Even if we destroy all those things, won't all the border points still be around the Citadel? Can't they get something back from them? Border points don't contain software, answered McCormick. They just respond to a remote computer. Trust me, Grant trying to extract data from a border point would be like looking for files inside a printer that just printed them. Ewan nodded, pretending to understand. At his side, Alex opened the exit door and wandered straight into the corridor without checking for enemies. Alex, snapped McCormick. Where's your concentration? Alex looked up and down the corridor. Once he knew the coast was clear, he rolled his eyes at his allies. I'm a clone, remember? Why would I need to be careful walking around my own corridors? I don't even know we've got intruders yet. Come on, Ewan. Ewan fought his way past the blatant demand from Alex and forced himself to hold his tongue since Salter was listening in. McCormick passed him the rucksack, after reaching aside to remove the cigar-shaped little detonator, which he passed to Kate. Salter, said McCormick, aren't you supposed to be going somewhere? Ewan looked back at Salter, who hadn't moved a millimetre from his position on the table. Yeah, get out of New London, said Alex, as Salter's legs woke up and slid off the table towards the floor. And quick, before you throw up again. Salter obeyed. He tucked the two clone radios into his pockets, double-checked that he still held his own, and left Office 35 to flee for his life. With the enemy no longer watching, Ewan's emotions ran straight to the front of his mind. He stared at McCormick, finally coming to terms with the fact that they were separating. He must have looked openly afraid. There was fear in McCormick's eyes too, fear and love. Take care, my boys, McCormick said with a smile on his face and in his voice. At the door, Ewan smiled back like he had once done to his father. You too, sir, Ewan answered. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. There's nothing you wouldn't do for the British people, Ewan, so I can assure you I won't. Alex walked further down the corridor, blank-faced and confident once again. It hurried Ewan and McCormick's goodbye, and Ewan briefly hated him for it. Nonetheless, Alex's haste was necessary, and all being well, Ewan would see his mentor again at the end of the night anyway. All being well, he thought to himself, he's left McCormick and Kate to chase Alex down the corridor. We've got to avoid losing a war tonight. All being well is a bloody tall order.
Oh,
End of chapter 16.
okay. So, I just had a question. Are we gonna see Soldier in the upcoming chapters or not? Or he's gone? Oh,
Oh, Salter. Well, he's basically gone. I'm not going to say whether he gets mentioned again, but
okay.
he's but he's not like part of the strike team or anything. He's just gone, and
Yeah.
the underdogs are going to assume that he's just doing what they've told him to do, because if he doesn't, he's dead.
All right. Right. Okay.
Mm.
So not quite. We're done with chapter 16 now. So what do you think? Should we move on to chapter 17 or we can do it for the next session?
Um, Let me check how long it is. Mm. It's not a long chapter, but it ends on an incredible cliffhanger. So
Okay.
I'm going to say let's leave it for next week, next month.
All right, I think so. That's gonna keep the excitement. And this is quite a happening chapter. And so we cannot take questions today because we're not live. We will definitely be answering any questions you have if you leave them in the comments below. And hopefully we can meet next month in September. Hope you guys had a great one and see you next month. Thank you so much, Chris.
Bye bye. No
Bye-bye.
problem. Bye.
Bye.